Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes, maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, I had a conversation today and we talked about things not talked about in sales. And you might be thinking, what is that? Because we're talking about everything. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Jaime Diglio, who is a fellow women's sales pro. She is the founder of inFirst Consulting. She's a TEDx speaker, and she runs the program Win Room Leadership. And WIN stands for What I Need. And that's really what we started the conversation with is when we join a sales team, we're never really asked, what do we need? What's important to us? What are our core values? What motivates us? And sales is human behavior. And so if we don't know that about ourselves, how are we then in a position to find that out about our prospects? We're not. And self-awareness is the key. So if we're unaware, can we ask people, what are the three descriptive words you think of when I say my name? And they may share something that you were unaware of that's a strength. And then how can you leverage that? So really understanding your core values is something not talked about. You're given your list of your accounts, you're given a tech stack, you have sales enablement support, but what motivates you? What lights you up? How do you make a decision? What are your strengths? What are your non-negotiables? All these things are important, and they're not really talked about. And sometimes, it's the leader. That's the way in which they were trained. No one ever talked about it with them, and so they continue to pass it on. And what I would say is we can interrupt that. It doesn't have to be the path forward. We also talked about communication and really the importance of communication from starting with our own self-talk. How are we showing up? Do we have trash talk in our head going on because this is what we're projecting? How are we communicating with our team? Do we know our team? Are we leveraging the strengths of our team? And again, she shared a practice activity that, you can work with your team to really get to know each other and understand how we can better support the clients as a team, with the breadth and the diversity of a team. We talked about in front of the prospects or in front of the customers, what are their personality styles? So before we actually get into a meeting, can we leverage AI to see what kind of personality they have, what communication preference they have, so we can align to it. We can make it more meaningful and tailored to the way in which they communicate. And can we do this in advance? If we're trying to read the room, reactively or in the moment, it might be difficult. So we definitely talked about technology and their benefits to it, but then also bringing it back to that human lens. If we use technology to get that first meeting, we still have to be able to build a relationship, be empathetic, ask impactful questions, practice active listening, all the soft skills in the meeting. And again, this stems from what's important to us, what are our core values, because that's going to determine how we show up. What kind of authentic, humanized experience can we provide that shows them this isn't just AI? Yes, I've used AI, but I've also brought in a human to support it. So encourage you to take a listen, whether you're a sales rep, a sales leader, or you run your own small business. I know that you will walk away with some tactics you can absolutely apply immediately. And Jaime was a wealth of knowledge. I learned a lot as always. So definitely encourage you to take a listen. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so you won't miss interviews such as this with Jaime. And always looking for reviews. Please take a moment, give us a review, let us know how we're doing. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. I'm delighted to speak with Jaime Diglio, and we're going to dive into things not talked about in sales. So we're going to peel back the onion layer and the curtain a little bit more as it relates to communication. So Jaime, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So happy to be here, Karen.
My pleasure. So Jaime is also a women's sales pro. So delighted to be part of that with you and other amazing women. And I wanted to talk about today, we how this really came up is we had our call and we decided to come on the podcast, but it was really to talk about things that aren't talked about. And we both agreed that communication was one of them. So why don't before we actually get in there, why don't you give us a little bit of backstory about how you became the founder of inFirst Consulting and kind of, maybe your communication pathway and what led or what role did that have in you becoming the founder of your company today?
Oh my gosh, yes. So, um, so I spent about 13 years, exactly 13 years at Gartner, built a $40 million business at Gartner from the ground up in the financial services space. I didn't know anything about financial services. I didn't know anything about tech when I started. I was new in sales also. So a big part of it for me was understanding human behavior, and understanding why people do what they do, which ultimately is that's sales, right? And I have, I'm a little, I guess it's a little bit unique is that I have a master's in organizational psychology. So understanding why people do what they do is something that foundationally for me, like what moves people forward and what keeps them stuck is just
Mhm.
underneath that foundation for me. And so how I built my business was really understanding different personalities, hiring diverse teams, how you can bring in people from different backgrounds and help them be successful, specifically in sales. Like we want, I would say it's like you in order to for clients to find you interesting, you have to know what you're interested in. So
Mhm.
really creating the most human and relatable people, and working as myself and connecting, really truly connecting with prospects long term, but also teaching that to the teams that I ran. So I did that for 13 years. Then I went to Microsoft for a few years, and then I got really tired of the lack of humanness in
Mm.
sales. And so I left and I started my own company back in 2018. I started in first in 2018. That was the first time I started it. Basically to help teams in transition, to help teams learn how to talk better together, which then when you learn how to practice talking better together, you're able to have better conversations with clients. So typically working with teams that have either a new leader or they've merged, some sort of transition, something that's changing within those sales teams. Then I got really lonely on my on my own, and I was being recruited by some companies, and Slalom was one of the companies that was recruiting me. And I really liked the Slalom's a management consulting company, and does everything from tech to strategy. And so I went there right before the pandemic to run sales for one of their markets. And the pandemic hit, like, literally a month before, and I just jumped into, coach mode, and I started running my coaching programs in Slalom, to help support and connect employees because everybody was so disconnected in the hybrid in this not hybrid, in this remote space. So I just started running my programs, and they were really successful at Slalom, and the next thing I knew, I was running their what experiments with their future of work team, and then I said, you know what? Like I want to make sure that I can go and run these team programs all over the place. So then I came back out and restarted my company again last year,
Mhm.
and that's where I'm at. So now I'm a partner. I'm actually a partner with Slalom. So they will bring me in to work with their customers, and then I work with lots of other customers outside of that and do different programs. Specifically, my main program is called the Win Room program.
Wow, what a story. And when you think about Gardner coming in with no financial services background or sales background to leading a team, it's kind of that full circle for you and learning about yourself as you can develop others.
And I didn't know anything about tech. But what did I know? What did I know? I knew how to understand people,
Hmm.
and at the foundation of selling, what is that, right? I mean, I'm sure you and I have worked across multiple industries and working with lots of different people in different roles, but ultimately understanding people,
Mhm.
their concerns, and how do you help them solve problems.
And how many people I love that because I always say I don't even call it sales anymore. It's human behavior for me. And so I love when you said that. But how many people take time to just even before they get on a call and for a moment just go, this is a person. Like I wonder what they would really want to happen or what they would want to avoid or why would they choose that? Like what is it about them, their personality? Like that level of curiosity. I don't know. You tell me. What is are you seeing that in your clients or just out there?
Well, it's a huge gap in
Mhm.
how people think about it. Now, it was really great. The CEO of LinkedIn just posted an article, I think yesterday or a couple days ago, talking about with Gen AI, right?
Mhm.
That the most important skill that executives are saying are needed with with using Gen AI tools, etc., are soft skills, communication skills. That is like the number one skill that needs to be developed with your employees, with your sellers in general. So they're saying it, but it's like we have to build this into the practices. And learning how to like it sounds so foundational. It is foundational. How do you communicate with people?
Mhm.
How do you sit in their shoes? Empathy. I mean, Adam Grant talks about it, Brené Brown talks about it, but like the future of leaders, successful leaders, it's not what is it like? It's not what it's not what how much you know, it's how much you care. You got to let people know how much you care first. Then they care about what you know.
Mhm. And I think it's how you make them feel. And when you can, be empathetic to their situation, whether you've done their job or not, it's all about a feeling. When they leave that engagement, do you make them feel better? Have you given them something to consider, learn about themselves, or just a different experience? Because I think so often they are commoditized, and it's just the same thing, and we're just giving ourselves a really, unfortunately, a bad name.
1,000%. And when working with the teams and the clients that I work with, I'm always talking about the three sales conversations. So like right now,
Hmm.
we're having three sales conversations. So the first conversation and the most important, well, it's actually not the most important, but you have to acknowledge it, is this conversation in my head.
Hmm.
So what am I thinking about what I'm going to say to you? Right? That's the first conversation. The second are, and we know this, what you think you're saying versus what you're saying, two different things. So the
Hmm.
second conversation are the words that I'm saying to you. But the third and the most important sales conversation is what you're listening to, because you're listening from your own background. You're listening from your own background, and that is the key to understanding, are they hearing you? How are you relating to the person you're communicating? That is connection. That is communication. Just because you said a bunch of words, it doesn't mean that they heard it. So it's like listening for their listening. And this is one of the foundational things that I teach people how to do, right? Because you can throw a bunch of words at someone. What do they actually hear? Are they hearing the key
Hmm.
points that you want them to hear? And that's where you have to understand more, and understanding more about what's their personality, what's their drivers, who are they? And there's ways to anticipate that.
Hmm. So much gold there, Jamie. And even I would say, and we're going to break that apart, but even the intonation, the pausing for effect, like all these things, because I think when you have something to share with your audience and it doesn't land the way in which you're not getting the result, sometimes you're thinking, how was my delivery? Like, could I have done it better? Could I tee it up better? Could I have paused before or after? And I think this is where that practice and that testing comes in, so that when you have that one card to play, you play it well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, but, the other piece around it that, where I saw in my teams back, I started running the programs that I run today. I started them back in 2015, 2016, because I saw that my sellers, they were so focused on the sale that were not they weren't focusing on who they were, like forgetting like why they joined the company, what's their
Mhm.
passion? How do you exude that? What are you interested in? How do you relate to people? How do you talk about other things other than just the one thing that you want that person to do? And
Yeah.
so bringing the humanness out in the seller so that they can show up and be real with
Mhm.
their buyer is so key and foundational. Whereas most of the training you see that happens, it's like they're just training them on some sort of, on the product features and functions. This is the script. And it's like, it just
Mm.
doesn't land well. It's
Mhm.
a missed opportunity to connect with your prospect or customer.
Mhm. And I think I couldn't agree more. And when you go back to the what we're kind of calling this is the things that aren't talked about. That for me is one of them. And it's like every training session I lead with, it's your purpose and your why. Because just like you said, if you're showing up immediately with your authentically, genuinely, because you know why you're here, and that comes out in the experience you're providing for your audience, but also they might see something in you that they also have, and that's the differentiator, because everyone else reading from a script or whatever they're doing, and yes, I don't disagree with scripts, but beyond that, know to your core, like, what lights you up, why are you happy right now, why did you join the company, why are you in sales, to bring that to the table, so that that's one thing that's unique to you that no one else can compete with. So I think that's one thing. If leaders are listening, I invite you to go through an activity, whether it's Simon Sinek's or some other activity, to really understand your purpose. Because even how are you coaching them? Well, you can't coach them the same, because your purpose, your passion are going to be different than mine, and what motivates you. And if I'm painting us all with the same brush, I'm not going to motivate you, because we're all so different. So find out what that is.
Right. Well, and that's why, like with the programs that I run, the win room programs, the first part of it, win stands for what I need and what's important
Mhm.
now. So it's about being very specific with each of your individual sellers. They all have different personality styles. They all have different drivers. Some people need a kick in the ass and some need a pat on the back. Right.
Yeah.
So understand what
Yeah.
motivates and moves people. So when you understand what motivates someone, that is that everything else, it makes it that 20% understanding, getting super clear on your individual, like if you think about that 20% of what they need to be motivated and to excel in their career, you can drop all the 80% of the other stuff. So this is
Mhm.
where it's sort of like getting super clear and doing that foundational work where you're understanding the motivations and drivers, the values, right? The behaviors, the things that what lights that individual up inside. How do they keep themselves motivated? So this self motivation as well. This is the foundation of what when we talk about the win room, right? It's like, what I need, what's important now, how am I staying strong despite all of the ups and downs of sales. We're building that inner resilience and confidence in themselves, which is a piece that really is missing in how we're
Mhm.
training our sellers.
And how, if you take it a step back, how would you, if you're talking to these sellers today, what would you say they could be doing themselves to say, how do I become more resilient? How do I stay strong? How do I stay more like, what can they be doing themselves before we can kind of talk to the sales leader?
So a few things. Well, number one, I always say is like you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. So it's very difficult to do anything on your own, despite what people say. So using your peers as ways to pull out what are the things that you think I'm good at. So I'll give you a couple
Mhm.
examples. After every meeting, what you could say with whoever you're communicating with, you could say, how do you think that went? And so the person will say, "Oh, great." And then you can go back and you could say, "Well, I really value your feedback. Could you give me something specific about
Mhm.
what went well in that?" And so what happens is you force the person to think, right? About, "Oh, what was good in that conversation?" That person then says it. You can message it too. And then what happens is you get that feedback. So you have an opportunity with every meeting, every conversation, every client conversation to get feedback
Mhm.
on what they thought. Did that go well? Did it not go well? And then writing that down. Okay. So then what you start to do is you start to see a theme of what people say you do well and what you don't do well. Another thing you can do is reach out to 6 or 7 colleagues, um, former clients, people you've worked with. Don't send it to just a bunch of your buddies, but you can reach out to them and you can say, "Hey, I'm doing some leadership development work, or I'm doing some whatever training. Could you give me the first 3 words you'd use to describe working with me?"
Mhm.
Okay. So you get this and you get these words back and you get it from, 7 people. So you have about 20 words. And what you start to see is data, right? You're seeing data on how people see you. And what we're doing with that, this is sort of helping you see back how others see you. And using that data combined with, there's personality assessments. I use personality assessments with my clients. How do you see that back? And then how do you use what people are seeing in you as a way to be very confident in how you're explaining to people, you know, what it's like working with me, what I value. It could be like, I'm dependable, trustworthy, get things done, right? Big thinker.
Mhm.
You can relate to anybody. So you'll start to see these themes. And so you're doing this work to then help you see how you can stand more firmly in who you are.
Mhm. I love that. So really increase your self-awareness, because what I always say is how we perceive ourselves is often different than how we're perceived by others.
Correct. So you want to get as close as you can to understanding how others see you. And a big part of this as well is that, we focus so much on the outside, right? We could probably do an entire whole talk about this. But the point is that you ever meet somebody and like they just shine and
Mhm.
they just seem genuine and real and you're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, thank you."
Yeah.
When it's sad, but this is the truth, is that's not that common today,
Mhm.
right? The problem is that we're spending so much time on the outward, how it looks on the outside. We do not focus time on understanding how do we embody it on the inside. So the closer we can get the outside and the inside aligned, the
Mhm.
more effective you're going to be, the more successful you're going to be in your sales career, your life, your relationships, everything.
Yeah. It just brings them together. I can see that even about myself. Um how it is so important to really get that alignment, because I think you just show up as a more well-rounded, relatable person. It's like for me, just what came to my mind was when I was training for marathons, but then I started cross training and I just became a stronger athlete versus just a runner.
Yes.
And so here it's just like when we're looking at the physical only, we're the same as everybody else. But when we can, I think the first step is getting in touch with our inner self and sometimes asking for that feedback. It's vulnerable. And I could see people not wanting to ask it because it's kind of like, be careful what be careful what you've asked for, because when they tell you, that's what they're seeing. And you either agree with it or you say, oh my God, I got to make some changes because I was unaware.
Right. Well, and there's this combination of, when you're somebody who is very data driven and organized and an executor, um, but if you're trying to be somebody else
Hmm.
because you think that that's how you're supposed to be, you're always going to be misaligned. Right. So it's
Yeah.
also about understanding. And again, part of the work I do with teams is like having people understand when they do their personality profiles, everybody has different strengths. And the reality is if a lot of companies, what they struggle is because like they can't innovate because they've got too many executors. They don't have any bigger picture people. And so identifying what are the things you can bring to the table that make you different than the rest of your peers, and how do you then
Hmm.
collectively win together?
Hmm.
And so it's about embracing who you are. Like I had an early career seller recently. I was in a coaching conversation with her and we did her profile, and she is right now is in a role where she has to be very detail oriented, delivering decks and creating and executing on client projects. And we did her profile and I said, "Well, you're an innovator. Like you're an out of the box thinker, you like big picture." and that's where your strengths are." And she's like, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, well, the job you're in right now is about how do I make sure this PowerPoint is perfect?" She's like, "Yes." And she's like, "Well, I just I always feel like I'm not detailed enough to, I'm always doing everything wrong." And I'm like, "Well, it's because that's not I'd be the same way." I'm like, "That's not your skill
Yeah.
set. That's not your strength." And she was like, "You have no idea how much of a weight was just lifted off of me. I keep
Mm.
thinking that there's something wrong with me." And I'm like, "There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that that's not where your strength lies. It doesn't mean that you can't try to be better at that, but like where you want to be focusing your time." And of course, then that conversation been was me about me trying to get her more aligned with sales and doing more sales, out prospecting type of roles. But that's something she can go back to her leader with and say, "Hey, this is really, where my strengths are over here, and I want to move my career in that direction." But yeah, I mean, it's like if I tried to be a really good accountant, I would poke my eyeballs out.
No, I hear you. And I think that personality profiling is huge for ourselves, but think about also our audience. And before we get on a call, can we run some form of analysis or assessment to go, okay, what's the best way? I mean, you can read the room, definitely. But in advance of that, how can you prepare to know the questions to ask, what's important to them, what motivates them, how they make a decision based on their personality traits? So, what are you seeing in terms of perhaps folks leveraging the technology maybe too much and not really then taking the soft skills or the humanized approach to really massage it and make it a more meaningful experience versus just solely relying on the tech?
Oof, yes. So I've been using, it's so funny because I've been using like Gen AI tools for a long time. And I've been using personality data driven tools to work with work with my clients, but also to prospect for my own business for a long time, just on my own. I always was trying to figure out if I, like I said to the beginning, is like I'm super fascinated, like what motivates people, and if I can get a leg up in understanding what they need, how they think ahead of time, it just makes our conversations that more
Mhm.
effective. So similarly, there's a variety of tools out there. I specifically love. There's a few tools that I work with. I work with XIQ. They're specifically for sales and marketing. I also work with Predictive Index, which is very effective for team building. Both of them are they're different types of platforms, but essentially understanding people's personality drivers and like where how to understand how they could be most effective. So the challenge that we have, and this is where back to what I was saying about sort of externally we can you know make it look great, but how are we actually taking the tool and then how are we actually learning from it? Yes, it can be a hack, right? So I can use these tools to anticipate. So for example, I can use the tool to anticipate and I did this before getting on with you. I did identifying what are the things that you're going to want to focus on. How do I make sure that I align our conversation most effectively? But then you can use the tool to understand, okay, this person is someone that likes to talk big picture, build rapport, etc. And then we can create a chat GTP prompt and we can write an email to that prospect based off of their personality so that it aligns with what they want to hear. Remember I said the three sales conversations? What do they want to hear? How do they want to be
Mhm.
communicated to? And that is super effective with opening the door and getting the meeting.
Mhm.
The piece where and I show this, I, educate and train on how to use this. But the piece that I then train on, which nobody focuses on, is then how do you actually have the conversation with the client? How do you make it real? How do you practice having conversations with people with different personalities? And that is the piece that we are missing. We're so focused on trying to open up the door, right? But then when you have to actually communicate, what do you say? And that
Mhm.
takes practice. You can't hack that.
Mhm. And I don't know how many people are thinking beyond the door opening because it's like, be careful what you wish for. If they answer, you you have to go in
Well
and speak
well,
now.
right, and that's your first impression. So,
Yeah.
if you're thinking of it as just opening the door, dialing for dollars, well, you're missing the point.
Hmm.
Right? You want to understand the relationship. How are you building a relationship? That's one of the things I hear a lot from sales leaders is that my people don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to build relationships with clients. And I'll say, it starts really with the team. Like they don't know how to communicate with each other.
Hmm.
They're in each other's way. Um so this theme around connection, communication. What is the buyer really listening to? Or is it all noise? You're just wasting time.
And you mentioned practice. So, like, what? Because I agree. And so, how can we train them to practice so that when they get into this environment, they know what to do? What are some ways that if sales leaders are saying, yes, I agree, this is an issue. We struggle both as a group, as a team to communicate. But I would also say sales leaders, the way in which you communicate to your team, you're modeling the behavior, you're showing them what good looks like. And if you're a poor communicator, if you're not practicing active listening, then you're saying, hey, this is acceptable. That's exactly what they're going to be doing on the calls. So how can we teach them, or what types of practice can they do to improve?
Yeah, I was just talking actually yesterday to a sales leader who was he just took over 5 teams. He had 3 teams and then now he has five. And he's like, Jamie, like my teams can't talk and we're trying to get them to cross sell, sell together. It's not working. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. One of the problems, I'm like, you want to know why? Because they don't know each other. And so that's
Hmm.
one of the things that you can do, and I do in my programs, is you're basically putting them in an hour a week, where it's a space that they get to know it themselves better, right? Remember, I mentioned sort of like understand your strengths, your values, what you bring to the table, what you're good at, all those things. But then also through that, because you're doing it in a group setting, they get to know each other. So,
Hmm.
so many times what happens is you're trying to sell into this client and then you don't even know the other people that are in your organization and your teams. Joe over here could have had that client in his last company, but nobody's asked him.
Yeah.
I mean, that is how crazy, right? It's this siloed thinking.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
so by building and sort of, I call it like removing these invisible barriers that exist between the sellers, between the team, so that they get to know each other on a more personal level. And then from there, they go, wait, how can we actually leverage your expertise in this so that, or I can help with this expertise over here. So getting them to understand more about each other foundationally. And by creating that practice each week. So it's really a practice where you're creating a safe space. Everybody talks about psychological safety. I say it's foundational safety, right? Because one
Hmm.
of the bigger problems is that we don't talk about, nobody talks about because the sellers are afraid to say they don't know.
Hmm.
So by creating a space for people to share and be like, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with that." But you have to create that foundational safety. And when you do that, it like completely changes the dynamic between people because everybody sees that everybody's struggling, you
Hmm.
know? So putting that practice in each week, I call it like breathing room, like, a breathing break. Like you make it focused on, okay, what am I trying to achieve? What are the things that I'm struggling with? What do I need right now? And then creating that practice across the team so that's sustainable. So it's a
Hmm.
sustainable practice that you're building in each week that you're coming to the table and people are they're working through what their challenges are.
And I think when when you bring those questions to the table of your own insecurities, of your own, my God, I'm the most junior one here, or why does everyone know more than me? But when you realize that there's a lot of similarities and crossovers, they become relatable because you're like, wow, you struggle with that too. And that for me is how community is built. Like people connect with your imperfections, not your perfections. And I think what beyond that, when you can teach them to do that and disarm and really ask questions and learn to leverage the team you worked with here, you can help me here. They start doing that with their customers or their prospects and saying, hey, so who's your counterpart in marketing? Or I know you used to work at Gartner, like and just that's the thinking that we can adopt to start cross selling and going deep, wide, and high, but leveraging that through both your team and your prospects.
A 1,000%. I mean, that's how I built my business at Gartner. It was
Hmm.
essentially, through referrals. At the end of the day, how is business sold, right?
Hmm.
People refer you. You do a good
Yeah.
job, right? You're a good person. They help you solve your problems. So there's just this whole reimagination around what like good sellers like look like. And I
Hmm.
know as we're sitting here talking here, like people are going, "Oh yeah, right." Like my people aren't going to share what they're struggling with. And I'll say, you know what? It's not for everybody, but you create an opt-in opportunity for people who do want that support
Hmm.
and want to be able to talk through situations. Not
Hmm.
everybody has to be part of it. One of the biggest things that I see every time, like I'll work with a company, and they're like, "All right, we want to mandate, we want to bring in your program, and we want everybody to go through it." And I'm like, "No, do
Hmm.
not make everybody go through it. Let people
Yeah.
opt in because once you force people to go into it, it's like people like to buy, they don't want to feel sold,
Hmm.
right? So instead, create something that people can opt in. They have a great experience, and other people go, "Whoa, what are they doing over there?" They're like, "I want to be part of
Hmm.
that." So that's how you pull people in, but not forcing it because you
Yeah.
force anything. You can't force anybody to do anything.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the bigger things I see, and it's just rampant today with leaders, this huge leadership gap. I talk a lot about the win room and the war room, and the war room is where we work against results. It's where leaders are leading with fear and driving people. They think what they're doing. They think what they're doing by instilling fear in their sellers is that they are motivating them and getting them to sell more. But actually, there's a whole bunch of science and data out there around this. They're actually making them less effective. They're making them doubt themselves, question. They're working against results. That's what I say war room stands for. So their behaviors and the things that the leaders are doing to try to motivate their team is actually doing the complete opposite.
Hmm.
And it's not necessarily the leader's fault because these are some of the techniques that were taught, last 20, 30 years, probably that were used on them. They don't work
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm. And I agree with that. I see it, and I kind of equate it to parenting too. It's like when you're yelling at your kid, it's not going to motivate them to do. It's going to damage the relationship, and it's also going to prevent them from trying new things and be a risk taker because they're getting yelled at. And so, I think, and there still is a lot of fear mongering in that dictatorship, and it's even though it was the way in which they were trained, it doesn't mean it's got to be the path forward. So at some point, you have to break the pattern and recognize again your buyer. Your buyer is your team. This isn't working for them. This isn't responding, and that's where again the self awareness. Hold that mirror up to you and say, what can I be doing differently if I'm not getting results? Is there a chance it's me here that I'm the problem?
Right. It's so funny. I was thinking of that Taylor Swift song. It's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Yeah, well, I think also, yeah, we could go in a whole bunch of different directions on this, but I think also back to the point of people are motivated in different ways, right? It doesn't mean you have to create a custom, weekly sales meeting around everybody's individual personalities, but it's also about how do we see like what these individuals can bring to the table. A lot of times leaders think they have to know it all, but they don't. Like, how do you get your people to help you solve for the answers? What do you think we could be doing? You could do a start, stop, continue. That's something that's
Hmm.
highly effective, and if people aren't familiar with what that is, it's like having your team evaluate what are the things that they want you to stop doing, they want you to start doing, and what they want you to continue doing as a leader. And then,
Hmm.
that's something you could do for each of them as well. But it's really about, like, how are we working this together?
Yeah. And I think it's also incorporating it into conversation. So it's not this rigid, as you mentioned, 30-minute call, but it's like as I'm talking to you and we're talking about a deal or something, I know why where this is going at the end. Like, I know because you're trying to buy your first house or you're getting close to retirement. Like, I can weave that into the conversation that allows them to feel acknowledged and validated. Like, yeah, you support me because you know I'm working really hard on this and you know where this is going. And just that little bit of the language of letting them know, it's just that's almost that silent motivator.
Mhm. Right. It's the I always say the order matters, and so it's about understanding the individual first, understanding
Mhm.
that human, and you always need to make sure you connect before you correct. So how are
Mhm. I
you
like that.
connecting before you're correcting? Because
Mhm.
if you build trust in that person, that leader, and I'm sure you and I both have examples. I have had leaders that have been so hard on me, but I know it's because they believe in me.
Yeah.
And they know foundationally that I can do better and that they are invested in me. So you earn the right to, be that way as the leader if you're fully invested in that person's performance and their
Mhm.
success. But if you're not and you're just making it about you, that's where it like you leave money on the table all day
Yeah.
every day.
Well, and you erode trust because I had a coaching client. I still remember exactly the conversation. And he was like, I said, he's like, I'm not getting the results from this one guy. And I'm like, well, walk me through your call and your process. And he's like, well, we just start right into it. Like, walk me through your numbers. And I'm like, okay, is there any rapport or did you asking about their weekend? No, I don't care about that stuff. And I'm like, well, you might want to connect with the person first. And he was just so, it was like, it was so foreign to him. But then the next two calls, he's like, I did it. And I said, "Well, what was the difference?" He goes, "He totally opened up." And I'm like, "Because he felt that you actually cared." He's like, "I never thought that would work." And I'm like, "We're humans first,
Well, and
you
so in
know?"
that perfect example, same thing with a customer. So if you make it just about the business, like you're never going to know the actual problem or the root of the problem because they don't feel safe to actually share that with you,
Mhm.
right? Of why you're not moving the deal forward. Once
Yeah.
you build a rapport and trust, then you're going to get to the answers much quicker. The only way to do that is if you understand the person.
Yeah.
And we're moving so far away from that, which is what, it's like it's scary.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think the AI definitely it's a huge time saver. But there's people that are using it and just relying on it solely, and when I read something, I know ChatGPT's written it, and so I just think, how do you bring it back a little bit? Like, where's that fine balance before saying, "Okay, I'll run it through it once, but then I'm gonna put my lens through it as a human and really create that feeling to my audience that they're gonna be like, "Oh, that's Jamie. She wrote that because and just that I feel that's missing because people are just getting the volume and the numbers and getting out there, and I'm like, that's still a spray and pray, but with ChatGPT as the engine, it's not helping
It's
you.
not real.
Yeah.
And so that, if you want to get back to, we think about, I talk a lot about with clients. It's like you don't actually have a revenue problem, you have an engagement problem.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because your people are not engaged. I think the stat is, I think it's like 30%, between 30 and 40%, over and over again. We're seeing when we look at the statistics about a percentage of your people on your teams that are engaged. So the way I
Mhm.
equate that is like, all right, if you're a soccer team, right? This means every moment of the day that of your soccer team of 10, that you've got 7 of your players are sitting on the ground watching the game.
Mhm.
And you don't know which ones are playing and which ones are just sitting there waiting for the next thing.
Mhm.
So the whole goal where people are like, "Well, I don't really care about engagement and how satisfied my employees." I go, "Oh, you don't." But every one of those people, every moment of the day, when they're sitting there and they're unengaged, they are losing you money every
Mhm.
moment. But when they're
Yeah.
engaged, they're making you money. When
Mhm.
they see what where they fit in the organization, they understand that you're invested in them, they're invested in you. You know how that is. I mean, it's so basic. It's like you remember the leaders that you'd run through walls for.
Yeah.
And then the other ones that
Yeah.
you knew it was just about them. So how are you creating engagement? And so back
Mhm.
to your point around, using the chat GTP is that it's not one of the bigger problems is that the sellers, or just in general, like, they don't actually know how to bring the Jamie into it, or, or the
Mhm.
Karen into it, because they haven't done that foundational work. And so that's what I was saying in the beginning of getting them to understand their leadership language. How, what are the things that they believe in? What are they interested in? How do you bring out the dynamicness in that individual and help them feel really confident in who they are? Because if you're,
Mhm.
feeling like a robot, you're going to act like a robot and you're not going to sell much.
Yeah. And even in their personal life, though, are they having these in-person conversations, or are they just texting and like social media all the time? And I think those two worlds kind of come together. That that's their communication style, but I think it's important to recognize that may not be the style in which your audience
Well,
prefers.
and it's building that muscle. So what I'm always doing in my programs, I'm building that connection, like that really, it needs to be built. That muscle needs to
Mhm.
be built. And when people can understand themselves better, they think better, right? When they think better, they feel better. And when they feel better, they sell better. And it
Yeah.
starts with how they're thinking about themselves. And you go back to what you said in the beginning is like, what are the things we don't talk about? People are just miserable right now. Miserable. And I think it's, a
Mhm.
lot of it is because they're lost. They've lost, their purpose. They don't feel seen. They don't feel valued. We're so quick to jump to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, that you've got all these people here that you're paying, and you're trying to motivate them, but you don't have time to work with them because we got so many other things. And so it's just that being able to come back to really a less is more, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're going to use ChatGPT, we're going to use AI tools, all these things. Great. What are we then stop doing? How do we
Mhm.
get back to basics here? Closer and closer to the human that we're trying to sell to.
And it's hard to do because even before we hit record, we were saying how many tabs do we have open on our own on our own desktop, and it's like do the one thing. Well, there's 13 other things waiting to be done. So, I think in our personal life, this is the way with the technology, with social media, with instant gratification, with Uber, everything, Uber Eats, DoorDash, like we can get everything that it's very difficult to do the one thing because there's so much competing noise. But the more we take on the noise, the less meaningful and engaging we are because all this is robbing us of our ability to engage.
Correct, which is why getting back to, clear is kind. So clear in who you are, foundationally, what you want for you, and the more you can, remove the head trash of like all this comparison. I did a TED talk earlier this year and I talk about this because it's about comparison. So I don't want to give it away, but essentially, like, how do you stop comparing? How do you get clear in what you want? And how do you remove all the head trash that's holding you back? So we can get completely drawn away from our main goals if we start listening to everything else. But if we foundationally understand who we are, what we want for ourselves, what we're passionate about, what we value, we get super clear there. That foundational work is so critical in making that other 80% go away. Because,
Mhm.
we're like, this is how we are. We're like, "Oh, I'm here and I'm doing this." And then the next thing we see somebody else doing that and we go, "Oh, maybe I need to do that. Or maybe I should do that. They look
Mhm.
like they're doing better than me. Oh, over here, over here." And you know what? I tell people, and it's all made up.
Yeah.
Everybody's just making stuff up. And you're thinking that they're doing amazing and you're like, "I'm doing terrible." Meanwhile, you're doing pretty good.
Mhm.
Right? So it's like you can't let it trick you. So this foundational footing, getting your foundation clear in what you're about, what you're after, for our sellers, getting that super clear for them makes it so they don't get distracted with all the other things.
Mhm. And what are ways if people are listening to that and saying, "Yes, I agree. I want to kind of get anchored and rooted myself before I let the other folks in to kind of sway me or or invite me to change my path, what are some things we can do to really get solid and increase our self-belief before we let anyone else try to influence it?
Well, a values exercise is really, really critical. That's what I do usually like week 2 working with my clients, understanding what you value. So typically if you're and everybody's is different, but one of the best things about understanding what you value and why you value it, it gives you a lot more clarity and confidence in how you show up and why you do what you do. So I was
Mhm.
just talking with someone the other day, that was really in a bit of a predicament, and this person's core value is justice.
Mhm.
And the role that this person is currently in, is completely misaligned with
Mhm.
with the value of justice. And this
Yeah.
person's like, I don't understand. Like I'm drowning, right? I am drowning. That I am miserable, and I'm like, well, that's why. I'm like,
Mhm.
that's why. So a lot of how we at our core, we're all uniquely different. And we have certain things that we value. And when we feel like we can't live into our value, it completely disrupts how we show up in every part of our life. And so when you're thinking about this, you might be going as a leader, like, oh my God, I'm not going to go there with people. But it's really foundational in understanding how someone thinks. So if your value is justice, mine is courage, right? Maybe somebody else is like execution, right? Or delivery, um, time management. I mean, there's 50 different values, or you the way to understand why someone does what they do and everything that they center their world around, that is so critical to seeing yourself and in trusting yourself because it's you.
And you can see just that example you shared about that girl, that there was an incongruence there, and I think when we don't know what our values are, or we haven't really done some inner work to find out what really is important to us, when we do find that out, we might find, wow, like I see why I get so triggered, or I see why I'm upset, or maybe this job or this partner or this whatever is not for me. But until then, we're frustrated because we don't know why things aren't going well, or why we're not happy, or why there's a disconnect.
Right, but then it also, if you understand why that person values what they do, you understand more about, okay, it's not don't take it personal,
Yeah.
how they are with anybody. So a quick hack for what you can do, to if you're trying to figure out how do you make a decision that's aligned with your values, and maybe you haven't done a values exercise yet, think about somebody that you admire. This is a quick trick that you can use for this. Somebody that you really admire, and you think about why you admire that person. Okay. And
Mhm.
so when you're in a tough situation, what you can do is you can think, what would this person do?
Mhm.
I always use Brene Brown, which is like, I love Brene Brown. Or I use
Yeah,
Brene
she's
Brown on my
great.
mom. But with Brene Brown, I think, I really admire her. And I admire her because she's had the courage to speak up and stand out, about really uncomfortable things that people don't talk about. So I really admire her. And she hasn't backed down. So that aligns. I don't know exactly what her core value is, but to me, it feels like courage. Hers
Mhm.
probably is too. So mine is courage. So whenever I'm in a difficult situation and I do not know what to do, if I'm a leader and I do not know what to do, I think about what would this person that I admire do?
Mhm.
And then I can be pretty confident that whatever I decide to do is going to be aligned with my values. And that
Mhm.
consistency is so critical because that's how you show up as a leader. Like, how are you consistently showing up as a leader? And it's not like, oh, your value has to be trust. Maybe it's not, but whatever it is, maybe like we'll just use execution, right? So maybe you're just all about execution, no nonsense. That's how you show up. You don't apologize for that. That is what you value, and so people are going to respect you. They might not always like you,
Mhm.
but they're gonna
Yeah.
respect you because that's your core value, and it's important for you to deliver on time, to be to be able to execute and say what you say you're gonna do, you do. that is the most important thing for you. And so when you're working with that person, you then understand more effectively how they show up and they're aligned. It's when leaders go from here to here to here, like they're your friend over here, and then they're an a-hole over here. And it's like, it's confusing. So clear is kind. Brene always says this, clear is kind,
Yeah.
unclear is unkind.
Yeah. I love Brene Brown and her and just what we talked about here. Another one is vulnerability. She's big on that. And I think when you just talk about leaders, and even going back to what you said, when leaders perhaps you don't want to push them into the likes of the WIN program. I think definitely not, but I also think there's an opportunity for leaders to share and be vulnerable and say what were their struggles, like what were their weaknesses, to really show them that they too started at this point. They did some work on themselves, kind of that turning point, and this is now how I'm here. And I think when you do that, you disarm, you build trust, but you show them you're relatable, that they actually can come to you versus when they think you're all buttoned up and have it all figured out, they're like, they don't get it because they've got it figured out. I don't. But I think there's an opportunity to disarm and show your team, I'm one of you. I started exactly where you with the same problems, the same struggles, the same this. And that's why I brought this program, or that's why we're doing this, is so that we can come out of this together.
Right. That is a really, so if we think about like generationally, for some people that is going to be incredibly challenging. However,
Hmm.
a lot of the trainings that I do, I specifically do with women, because women sell different than men, and there's lots of different training and coaching that women need. And I'm generalizing here, but over working with thousands of women, I see the same patterns over and over again that women struggle with
Hmm.
in sales versus men. Um, but also that younger generation is, I see that they're like desperate. We could even talk about, family. That younger generation of men as well, like they really don't want to have like this sort of know it all buttoned up, right? They want to be more human. More of
Hmm.
them have been raised by moms that have worked.
Yeah.
Right? They wanna have diverse, teams. They wanna be able to talk about what they're struggling with, but it's not necessarily accepted in a lot of ways. In a lot of organizations, that's where we talk about, like, psychological safety or what I call foundational safety. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like, how are you
Yeah.
gonna get the most? Everybody's like, "I wanna get the most productivity and the most out of my people." I'm like, "Well, if they don't feel safe in their environment,
Hmm. Not going to
you're
happen.
not gonna get the potential. You're not gonna get them to reach their peak potential.
Hmm. And even I remember doing a talk on just preparing to for an interview or to get the right job, and just what you said there is understanding your core values, but the next thing is aligning it to the company, because I mean everything is you're set up for failure from day one if you're going after you just want to get that sales job or the money's there or something, but their core values are not in line. Like you are kind of going against everything you believe in. You're selling your soul to the devil.
Yeah, and so I'll often get a leader that will come to me and say, "Jamie, like, I want my people to be bought in on our company culture and our values. I want them talking about it. I want them to be bought in." And
Hmm.
I'm like, "Great." So, and usually it's funny, I saw recently, I forget the name of the company. But the CEO came in and he was like, "All right, I'll give $100 to whoever can say what our core value is."
Nobody knew it.
And yeah, and right. I think somebody might have known something about it, but all I kept thinking to myself is, that is the complete opposite way to do it.
I know. Yeah.
So, what you do, if you want people to be bought into your core values, when half of the companies actually don't even stand by their core values,
Mm.
but if
Yeah.
let's just say a organization that really believes in their core values, and you want your team to get bought in, the first thing you need to do is get the individuals on the team to understand what their individual core value is first. And so
Mhm.
once you understand what their core value is and you do that work, that foundational work I'm talking about, you then can tie it directly to the companies. And so when you do that, right, you do that first, you help them see that their core value is tied to that bigger core value of the company. They immediately go, wow, I think I'm in the right place. I wasn't
Mhm.
sure before, but now I understand it. I feel aligned, right?
Yeah.
But that's the piece that we slide we don't pay attention to. That's the piece where I'm working with people. Like,
Mhm.
that's where I'm focused, because that's where that's the gold, because that's how you get people from, you know, being disengaged to engaged, from not seeing how they fit in to say, "Hey, I have a future here." Saying, I'm not seen. They don't see me, they don't value me," to, "I get it. I understand what my
Mhm.
role is here in this organization." Losing
And
money,
think
making money.
Yeah, and think about full circle, but what when we started it, what are the things not talked about? And that's it right there, that purpose, that core values and understanding, intrinsically what is important to me, what matters to me. And I think just to echo what you just said is when you do that, you align and you get that validation and that sense of certainty that I am in the right place. And then you want to work, you want to drive results. So it's a win-win, right?
You got it. That's what the program I run, it's the win-win. So, you work what I need is what I need, what does the employee need, and then what's important now to the leaders. So we combine it. It's the win-win. So
Ah, I love it.
it's the program where it's a win for the employees and a win for the leaders. They both get what they want and what they need.
Well well, you've provided so much value, insights, and really kind of talked about the things that aren't talked about as it relates to communication, really understanding our why, our purpose, and how we can bring that to have meaningful, authentic, and engaging conversations, both with our teams and with our prospects. So thank you so much, Jamie, for everything you shared. I know there's going to be people want to connect with you, learn more about your programs, watch your TED Talk. I did see it; it was amazing. Where can they reach out to you to do all that?
They can reach out definitely on LinkedIn, Jaime Diglio, JaimieDiglio, or you can reach out to me via email, Jaime at infirstconsulting.com.
Awesome. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much for everything. And I would encourage you, sales leaders and sales reps, if you do want to make some change and really increase the engagement, help your team understand their core values, what's important to you. Take some of the advice, the practice sessions that Jamie suggested, and put them into practice for you and your team. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.